In this part of the experiment, we tested fruit flies' preferences for tissue with vanilla versus tissue without vanilla extract. Oddly enough, the fruit flies preferred the plain tissue 65% of the time. They only went towards the vanilla-scented tissue 35% of the time. And we found this very strange because fruit flies are very attracted to alcohol and fruity and flowery scented things. Here's a visual demonstration of their preference for the plain tissue versus the vanilla tissue. The pink over here is the plain tissue, and you can see that it's notably higher than the blue. The second experiment we did was the fruit flies' preferences for yellow paper versus white paper. We had white tissue paper on one side of the water bottle and yellow paper on the other side. Again, the fruit flies preferred the plain paper 64% of the time, and they only went towards the yellow paper 36% of the time. And again, we found this very odd because yellow is a very bright color which resembles a lot of different fruits, whereas white isn't really a color which occurs naturally in nature much of the time, and especially in the fruit flies' habitats. So you'd expect them to go towards something which resembles food. That obviously was not the case, however. Here's another visual demonstration of their preference for the plain paper as opposed to the yellow paper. The next experiment we did was yellow apple versus paper that looks like an apple. We basically just glued some white, yellow, and green paper together and made a little fake apple slice. And oddly enough, they displayed the most preference in this instance for the fake object. The fruit flies preferred the fake apple 76% of the time. They only went towards the real apple 24% of the time. We could come up with zero explanation for this. We can somewhat understand why they would prefer the control in the previous two experiments, but in this instance, we used actual food versus paper, and they still chose the paper. I think perhaps that the apple was simply too sour for them. It was a yellow apple, and those tend to be more sour than the red ones. Yep, there you go. This graph isn't accurate. Let's pretend that the blue represents the paper and that the pink represents the yellow apple. The last experiment we did was Fuji apple versus paper that looks like an apple. Here's the actual apple slice over here. We wanted to do another apple experiment because we thought that they would obviously go for food rather than paper, and we thought that perhaps it was the variety of apple which was the reason for their odd decision. And we were somewhat right. In this instance, they chose the fake apple 52.5% of the time, and they preferred the Fuji apple, the real apple, 47.5% of the time. This was the highest rate of going towards the actual object, the real thing in all these experiments. So that in and of itself was odd, for different reasons. And we suspect that they went towards the Fuji apple more often. We suspect that they went towards the Fuji apple more often because it's a sweeter variety of apple, and it probably let off more aroma and scents which would attract them, as opposed to the previous real, quote-unquote, real objects in the experiments. Here you go. It's almost exactly the same. The results of these experiments went completely against the predictions. In every one, the fruit flies chose the fake option over the real one, which perhaps indicates some flaw in the design or a failure to fully understand the behavior of the flies. An example of evidence for the latter would be the fruit flies preferring the Fuji apple significantly more than the variables of the other experiments. This apple was the sweetest option presented to them, which may be the reason for this unexpected partial conformance to our hypothesis. Another reason they never went towards what we expected them to go towards is because fruit flies do tend to go towards decomposing matter, And we noticed that several days after the experiment, when we still left them in the container with the apple, they were swarming the apple because it had finally started to rot and was therefore releasing whatever scents attract fruit flies more frequently. And this concludes the experiment.